Now that the dust settles and we had some time to think about what type of impact the new restriction list has on both formats, let's take a look at which clans come out victorious and which clans just were booted out of the format.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another video, and this video we're doing somewhat of an extension topic of yesterday's Cardfight update, where I talked a bit about the latest restriction list that will come into effect beginning next month, which will change a lot for standard and in some regards also something for premium. And in this video we're gonna talk about which clans are basically going to profit off these new restrictions and which clans are gonna be hurt a lot. So in layman terms, which clans are the winners and which clans are the losers, and of course anybody in between. And we're gonna start off this video with the standard side, as that is where most of the action is going to happen. So in standard we got a lot of restrictions. I'm not gonna go over them one by one. If you're interested in those, then check out this Cardfight update video where I basically explains the new restrictions and what type of impact it has for the respective clan. But what these new restrictions are going to do is they're going to slow down the meta quite considerably. Not entirely, as we still have a lot of strong Excel decks floating around, especially with Narukami. Is going to be one of the top dogs for the meta to beat, and it's going to be the deck to beat in the first few weeks. But with the hit on Tachikaze, Pale Moon, as well as Murakumo, which were three very strong Excel decks, we can at least assume and expect that meta will slow down in some degree. Especially with Narukami being a slower type of Excel deck, which will help other builds. So with that in mind, we can already assume that slower force decks and protect decks that were just a tad too slow to compete with the current Excel decks are gonna come up with this new restriction hit, as the meta will slow down a little bit, making those decks now shine a bit better as they have time to do their thing, making them more viable. And think about decks like the new Angel Feathers is going to come up, even Gear Chronicle in some aspect. Also, Dimension Police has been performing quite well, and with a slower meta, then that build can even perform better. Also, of course, Bermuda Triangle is still going to be strong, even though it has a hit on Riviere's ability. The fact that Lieselot has been unrestricted with Melody gives the clan another tool option or another deck option to go for that allows them to have more ways to do their thing in the meta, and with a slower meta makes Melody even more deadlier. And even though the Melody Grade 2 support wasn't all that great, they at least have some upgrades to the build. So they aren't outright out of the game as well. So with that basic understanding of what I expect the meta is going to shift towards after this ban list, we can basically slot every clan into 5 categories to have a better picture of which clans are winners, did either improve from the ban list, had no change on the overall game plan, are somewhat weakened, and just outright losers of the ban list. And for winners, we have of course Narukami, which is going to be one of the top dog of the new meta that's going to come out immediately after the ban list hits. Then we can see Shadow Paladin, and this is because Mortar Phantom is just as solid as ever was, but now with a slower meta, gives the deck even more breathing room. Also, Claret Sword Dragon is not something to underestimate, as it can do its thing and has some high roll capacity around it, and it being a potential going on my first grade 3 turn and I can kill you if I'm lucky, gives it some leeway, even though it's maybe not the most consistent build out there. But those are 2 clans that you can expect with these ban lists, as these were already quite performing decks. Now, 2 other winners are Gold Paladin, that is the Agravain build, and this is basically the build that's been called the Touchy Light, the Angerblade Light. Now with Angerblade out of the picture, it becomes the new Angerblader build. And I personally am piloting the deck right now, and I can say, even before the restrictions, that deck was something that you need to watch out for. Now with a slower meta, gives that deck even more breathing room, and that could be a potential very strong pick for a aggressive playstyle, but also can be somewhat mid-game battle orientated if they want to go for a more longer game, as they have more tool options available to them. So it's a very versatile and strong deck that you shouldn't underestimate after the new ban list drops. And another Excel deck that will come around is Aquaforce. This is also a very strong deck with less card reven, but it was seen as the more weaker versions of the Excel decks, as unlike something like Agravane or Tachikaze or even Narukami to some extent, is that they needed a lot of key pieces to do their thing. And yes, Anger Blader needs also a lot of key pieces, but Anger Blader only needs a Anger Blader and one or two Sweeper Akukantos, and the rest is just to generate the gauges. For Aquaforce, that's not the case. They actually need a lot of their key pieces to do their combos, otherwise they cannot effectively put out a push. Now with the meta shifting to a somewhat slower format, that gives the deck a bit more breathing room where they can keep their key pieces, their combo potential cards in their hand, and they don't have to waste it for guarding, making them more effective in their aggressive assault when they go into their grade 3 turns and afterwards. So it gives that deck a lot more breathing room and a lot more potential, and I think that deck is gonna benefit a lot from this new restriction list as well, even though itself didn't get buffed in any shape or form. Now the decks that are going to improve this ban list, and this can be from its now somewhat relevant, it can do its thing, it can also mean that its main oppressor is now removed out of the picture, are basically a lot of protect decks and a lot of force decks that couldn't really do their thing in the previous era that was actual fight. And you can think about decks like Angel Feathers that has already its aggressive own strategy, especially with the new build that's coming up with the new VR. We can look at Genesis. This is a combo-oriented deck, but also think about Oracle Think Tank that got their Tsukuyomi strategy. That's also a very fast-paced protect deck. Nubatama can also now have a comeback, as they could deal with multi-attacks, but to a certain degree, but are very better equipped against high attacks, which we're going to see with a new influx of protect and force decks. But also, Spike Brothers was already pretty solid. Bermuda Triangle did also get improved in some regards. Yes, Riviere got a hit, but with the unrestrictions for the Melody build, gives them another 2 options. And even though Riviere got hit, I don't think that that's a big enough hit to say it's going to be detrimental to the clan. I think it's still going to be one of the strongest decks. But we also got clans like Dark Regulars, Neo Nectar, Nova Grappler, Dimension Police, which were already pretty solid in their own regards. Maybe something like Neo Nectar was a bit slower, but with a slower meta, allows them to benefit more from the mechanic that are these new tokens, which can be pretty solid in a less multi-tech aggressive format and more about high hitting numbers. And now we get through the no change clans, and I believe these clans are either benefiting as well as weakened by the ban list in the same capacity, or aren't really affected in any kind of capacity, and those are clans like Kagero, Gear Chronicle, Mega Colony, Great Nature, and Link Joker. In the case of Link Joker, Great Nature, and Mega Colony, these clans are really doing their own thing, and it doesn't really matter if the meta is slower or not. They either are way too under supported that it's gonna make a big difference. Yes, we got Isabel with the latest support, but I still think it's not enough for Great Nature to compete with the current format, especially with something like Aquaforce, Narukami, and Gold Paladin still roaming around, which is still too much for them to handle. Link Joker is still too slow for the entire format, as it's relying on a second grade 3 right turn to do their thing, unless they're running a lot of grade 3s to the luckily soul charge something. Isn't ideal. Kagero is just doing its own thing by restanding a lot. They don't really mind. At the same time, they benefit from the format going a little bit slower. But then again, with the end, it didn't really mind that the format was a bit aggressive, as they could benefit from that with the extra restands that comes with the end with lower hand size. So it's a bit from both worlds. And the same goes for Gear Chronicle, where, and talking about the new Rebellion build, yes, it's easy for them that the format is a little bit slower, so that's a positive, but at the same time, they could deal with a aggressive format because they could just guard everything from hand, and they get the benefit because they now have a lower hand size. So there are 2 ways for Gear Chronicle, just like Kagero, that you can see the dice rolling, so that's why I think that's an overall no change in effectiveness to the clan, but we have to wait to see what the actual impact is going to be. Now, for the weakened clans, these are clans that either got a restriction in some kind of capacity or are going to be impacted by what's going to be meta. And the clans that are going to be weakened are, of course, Murakumo and Pale Moon. I don't think they're going to be outright gone. They're still very strong decks and they still have very good tools to their disposal, but it did get a hit in some capacity where the clan is going to be a bit weaker off than they were before the ban list. There is no way that you can deny that. But we also have clans like Royal Paladin and Grand Blue here. Even though these clans weren't hit, I think they're going to be impacted negatively by this ban list, Royal Paladin mainly because Narukami is a thing. And the current Royal Paladin build is all about Ganslot with their Blaster Blades, and now that Narukami is going to be one of the most predominant decks out there, that makes that build much less effective. But Grand Blue is also one of the targets here, and it's basically the same thing, that they still cannot deal with the aggressive nature that we're going to get with Gold Paladin, Narukami, and Aqua Force is going to come out of this ban list. But also still, yet again, we have Narukami, which means they need to play conservatively with their tools, and they need to have a way to clear out the board. Otherwise, Narukami can just snipe out their key pieces, their essential cards. So they have a weaker spot in this format, and they just lack the necessary support. So hopefully with the upcoming support, Grand Blue can then skyrocket to a better position. And then lastly, we got a loser for Standard, and there's only one clan that needs to be addressed here, and that's Tachikaze. The fact that they lost Anger Blader is a huge blow to the clan, as they effectively lost their second boss monster that they got in the entire support wave for Standard. The only thing they have left to fall back on is Gigarex. And Gigarex isn't a terrible card per se, but they just lost so much potential. Yes, they can still run the card at 1 of in the deck, and anybody is going to do that plays Tachikaze, as Anger Blader, if you just draw into that thing, it can potentially just still win you games, but it's such an inconsistent thing to have. And Tachikaze players really need to figure out how they need to build a deck, because it's going to be a tough ride for those players. And I think that's the clan that got the hit the hardest of them all, because all the other clans that got a restriction can come back in some regard. Narukami has a lot of other tools to their disposal. Bermuda Triangle got even something unrestricted, and Riviera is still strong enough for them to do what they need to do. Murakumo got so much more strong cards that they can fall back onto. Same as with Pale Moon. Yes, the Silverthorn is weakened to a very significant state, but the deck is still solid enough, in my opinion, where it can still perform quite decently. Maybe not, certainly not top tier, but still good enough, in my opinion. But they also still got Golden Beast Tamer and even a Nightmare Doll deck that people are underestimating. I think the Nightmare Doll deck is still a significant threat if you have a right pilot behind that deck. So those are basically the situations for Standard. Now we get to the premium side, and this is a very short story, as they didn't really get a lot of hits. We got the hit for Pale Moon, and we of course have the hit on the Wonder SL that's now banned. So with that said, there isn't really a lot that's gonna happen directly that we're gonna see immediately after this ban list hit, because there are only 2 things that are going to happen. Pale Moon is gonna be weakened, but Pale Moon wasn't really that supported, or at least that represented in the meta, so we're not gonna see the impact of that. But we also see an impact on Gold Paladin. But however, I don't think Gold Paladin needs to be in the losers bracket or in the weakened bracket. I think they're gonna be in the no change category. It's gonna be the same situation that we had with Kriff. They got a hit, people adapt, and the clan will come back. Will it come back as strong as it was before? I doubt it, but it will be a different playstyle, as they can just go for the superior right gimmick with Bowmains and the new Wonder SL. So I think Gold Paladin, with the whole superior right chain gimmick, it will have some way that it will bounce back and be at least some shape or form viable, but we have to wait to see how that's actually going to be. But because those were the only restrictions, we can immediately say that the winners of this restriction list are Dark Regulars, Neonectar, and Bermuda Triangle. And the reason for that is that Dark Regulars and Neonectar were, together with Gold Paladin, the top dogs. Now that you somewhat removed or weakened one of the top dogs, now these 2 are going to run supreme. These are going to be left unchecked. Yeah, they're going to check each other to some degree, but yeah, that's going to be very scary. The reason why I also state Bermuda Triangle is the deck is relatively new, the superior right gimmick for Riviera, but it is a solid build, and that also didn't really got hit. Sure, it had the same errata like in Standard, because the Riviera is going to be universal errata, but I don't think that that's enough to actually hinder the clan or hinder that specific deck at all. So I think the Bermuda Triangle deck is going to be just fine, and it's going to be one of the serious contenders out here. But also, one small implications with the hit on Gold Paladin is that Grand Blue is going to improve as well. As Grand Blue has always been a pretty solid build with the whole Megiddo OTK strategy, but the main issue that the deck had was if they did not get that second turn, or that's at least that second stride, then they didn't do anything. And their main problem was Ezel, because those could really be very aggressive out of the woodworks. They can just hinder their entire game plan. And with their main problem now limited to some aspect, I think Grand Blue is gonna improve out of this restriction list as well. But that's basically everything that we can say about Premium, because there wasn't really a lot of hits. And now the Dark Regulars and Neo Nectar are probably gonna run Supreme out of everything. You can say that all the other clans are basically in the losers category. And the reason why I say that is not only just for in a joking sense, but basically there are two things for Premium at this point. First off, you remove one of the top dogs, but you still have three other top decks left that are unrestricted in some capacity. So they're gonna do their thing just fine, meaning all the other decks are gonna stay in the position where they are. And not a lot of decks could do their thing in Premium, which is the reason why I say that they're all losers, because they didn't get what they wanted or deserved out of the restriction list for Premium. But at the same time, the other point for Premium is the Premium landscape that we had in the last couple of seasons was mainly shifted around Ezel. Ezel was such a specific deck that warped the entire format. Whenever somebody was talking about the strategy or build, it was always, can it somewhat compete with Ezel? Is it able to beat Ezel out of the game? Is it able to beat Ezel's Spearride? Is it able to beat Ezel's ultimate win condition? Are you able to survive that? And we have seen a lot of decks shaping around that idea and then come to fruition. We see a lot of builds either able to survive the early onslaught of Ezel and then can beat back with a one-turn OTK. A good example is Dark Regulars. Their first turn OTK is mainly to kill Ezel as fast as possible, as giving Ezel one extra turn can mean your death. And Ezel, with losing one of their main aggressive tools, can result in a couple of things. Just like I explained, they can either bounce back, but if they do not bounce back as good as we think they can, then that can mean that the entire format around it will also change, because they no longer have to think about Ezel. They no longer have to think about Gold Paladin as a threat. So either the format will, just like Standard, will slow down a bit, or Dark Regulars and Neo Nectar will just keep doing their thing and nobody can compete. But at the same time, one of the loser clans basically can suddenly pop off and combat Neo Nectar or Dark Regulars to some capacity, where it could not do that beforehand because Ezel was in its way. So where with Standard, I think it's very clear and very obvious where we're going to head with the new restriction list, because we had a lot of restrictions, but with the less restrictions in Premium, it's gonna be hard to expect where we're actually going to head from this point onward. But that's basically everything for this video. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think is gonna happen after this restriction list, and what we're going to see in the first BCS or in the first Springfest with Team League, which decks are gonna basically run Supreme for the respective format. As for some aspects, you can say it's pretty clear this deck is gonna win, or this deck is gonna perform really well, and these decks are basically out of the picture for the current couple of months. But there are so many extra factors that maybe we're overlooking a specific build, or we're overlooking an aspect of a clan or a deck that suddenly is a very dominant force, or can suddenly change the meta significantly because one or two specific builds or decks are suddenly removed or dethroned from the position. So let me know in the comments down below all your thoughts and opinions in the about this topic, and let the discussion going. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, then why not head over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. Well, with that said, I'm Mr. Timely, and I see you guys in the next one!